The Plague Chronicles, Chapter 2, Quarantine, Location Lima, Peru. Sergeant Miguel Alvarez stood at the edge of the quarantine zone in Lima, Peru, his heart heavy with the weight of his orders. The fungal infection spreading through the city had turned it into a war zone, and he and his team were tasked with enforcing a strict quarantine to prevent the disease from reaching the rest of the country. The streets were eerily quiet, broken only by the distant sounds of chaos, shouts, cries, and the occasional gunshot. Miguel had joined the army to serve and protect his country, but this mission felt different. The enemy was invisible, insidious, and the casualties were not just numbers. They were his fellow citizens. He adjusted his helmet and glanced at his team, a group of young soldiers who looked as uncertain as he felt. They had all been through rigorous training, but nothing could have prepared them for this. "Stay vigilant," he ordered, his voice firm. "We can't let anyone through. The safety of the entire region depends on this quarantine." As they patrolled the perimeter, Miguel's mind wandered to his family. His younger sister Maria and her two children, Sofia and Mateo, lived in one of the most densely populated districts. He had tried to contact them, but communication was sporadic, and he had received no word from them for days. The thought of them trapped in the city, exposed to the infection, gnawed at him. Miguel's thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the checkpoint. A group of civilians was arguing with the soldiers, desperate to get through. Among them, he spotted Maria's familiar face, her eyes wide with fear and determination. She was holding Sofia in her arms while Mateo clung to her leg. "Maria!" Miguel called out, pushing through the crowd to reach her. "Miguel, thank God!" Maria exclaimed, her voice trembling. "We need to get out of here. The infection is everywhere. It's not safe." Miguel's heart ached at the sight of his sister and his niece and nephew, their faces pale with fear. He knew the protocols, no exceptions, no matter the circumstances, but seeing his family in such distress made him question everything. "We can't let anyone through," Miguel said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "The infection could spread beyond the city. It's for everyone's safety." "Please, Miguel," Maria pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. "We can't stay here. The children, they won't survive. You have to help us." Miguel looked at his sister, the desperation in her eyes, and knew he couldn't turn his back on them. But helping them meant defying orders, risking not just his career, but his life. He took a deep breath, weighing his options. His thoughts flashed back to their childhood. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Lima, Miguel had always felt a deep sense of responsibility for his younger sister. Their father, a mechanic, and their mother, a nurse, had instilled in them the values of hard work and resilience. After their parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, Miguel had become even more protective of Maria. "Follow me," he said finally, his voice low. "Stay close and don't say anything." Maria nodded, clutching her children tightly. Miguel led them through a series of alleyways, avoiding the main checkpoints where the strictest enforcement was in place. His heart pounded in his chest as they moved, every shadow and sound making him jump. They approached a secondary checkpoint manned by a skeleton crew of soldiers. Miguel recognized the officer in charge, Lieutenant Herrera, a by-the-book soldier who wouldn't hesitate to report any breach of protocol. "We need to get through," Miguel said, keeping his voice calm. "They're my family. They need to reach the mountains." Herrera looked at him, then at Maria and the children. "You know the orders, Alvarez. No exceptions." "Please, Herrera," Miguel said, his voice cracking. "They won't survive here. I can't let them die." Herrera's face softened slightly. "You understand the consequences if you're caught, right?" Miguel nodded. "I do." After a tense moment, Herrera sighed and motioned for them to pass. "Go quickly and be careful." Miguel felt a surge of relief as they slipped through the checkpoint. They moved swiftly, the distant mountains their only beacon of hope. But their escape was not unnoticed. Alarms blared, and the sound of pursuing soldiers grew closer. They reached a makeshift barricade, the final obstacle between them and the open road to the mountains. Miguel turned to face the soldiers, his family behind him. "Get ready to run," he whispered to Maria. As the soldiers closed in, Miguel fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the streets, momentarily startling their pursuers. "Go!" he shouted, pushing Maria and the children forward. They sprinted towards the barricade, hearts pounding, fear driving them onward. The soldiers fired back, bullets whizzing past them. Miguel kept his focus, his only thought to protect his family. They reached the barricade and clambered over it, the soldiers hot on their heels. Just as they cleared it, a group of infected civilians burst through a nearby alley, overwhelming the soldiers and creating a chaotic diversion. Miguel and his family seized the opportunity, running for the safety of the open road. The sounds of the city faded behind them as they made their way towards the mountains, the promise of safety and a chance of survival driving them forward. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Miguel noticed a change in the air. It was cleaner, fresher, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere they had left behind. He took a deep breath, feeling a glimmer of hope. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time in hours, Miguel allowed himself to believe that they might just make it. They found a deserted farmhouse on the outskirts of a small village. It was dusty and abandoned, but it provided shelter and a place to regroup. Miguel checked the perimeter, ensuring it was safe, before leading his family inside. The farmhouse was a stark reminder of simpler times. Miguel remembered the long hours he spent working on his father's car, learning the intricacies of engines and machinery. He thought of his mother, who always had a kind word and a warm meal ready for him, no matter how tired she was from her shifts at the hospital. As they sat around a small fire, Miguel felt a sense of calm wash over him. They had made it this far, and he knew they could go further. He watched as Maria comforted Sofia and Mateo, her face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "We're going to be okay," Miguel said, his voice steady. "We're going to find a safe place and get through this, together." Maria nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. "I know we will, Miguel. I trust you." The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Miguel was determined to fight for his family's future. As he drove away from the small farmhouse, he tightened his grip on the steering wheel of the commandeered vehicle he had found and pressed on, driven by a fierce resolve and the unbreakable bond between a brother and sister and a father figure to his niece and nephew. As they continued their journey, Miguel knew that they would face many challenges, but he was ready. He had always thrived under pressure, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. With the mountains looming in the distance, Miguel drew strength from his family's resilience, united by the bonds of love and the unyielding will to survive. Join us next week for the story of Aiko Tanaka,